Good afternoon, folks. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is it possible to see as many of you as possible? Can everyone hear me? Okay, what I'll do is I'll wait a few more minutes before for everyone to join us before I start. There are 30 people in this class, so I think it might take us a few more minutes for everyone to log on. While you're waiting, if you can do me a really big favor and actually email me at my Ryerson address. And what I'll need is your where you're located, your phone number, and your alternate email address. Like if you have a Gmail address, for example. Okay, does all that make sense? I see a furrowed brow. Does that make sense? Tess, you can enable your microphone.
I was gonna type it out, but I was just gonna say I was surprised when you asked for our personals because I've never been asked for my personal before, and I've been told explicitly never to email a prof with my personal. So that's why I was just confused.
No, it's just that for whatever reason, I found that it's always handy if I need to get a hold of someone really quickly to have a Gmail. Because I've been doing this long enough to know that you probably check your Gmail accounts before you check your school accounts. So it's just for me and just in case I really have to get a hold of someone. Okay. If you don't feel comfortable, that's fine, but it's it sometimes you'll want to you will want to be contacted. Okay. So if you can do that, I'd be grateful. And I don't know if we have everyone yet, but why don't we, why don't we get going? So the first thing I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about myself and who I am. My name is David Mackay. I worked with the CBC for about 26 years. I was on staff, worked on, I was an investigative producer, lots of investigations into things like school violence, which was our most recent investigation, investigated violence in nursing homes, for example, problems in long-term care homes. So all of the stuff that we're seeing during the pandemic, we were reporting on that years ago with a program called Marketplace that if you guys watch the CBC, you may be familiar with that show. And then a couple of years ago, I was part of a global investigation into faulty medical devices called implant files. Where the politics comes in is that for the last 7 years, I worked for a show called Power and Politics. Have you guys ever heard of Power and Politics? Vashi Kapelos is the host now. So I was a producer for that show for about 7 years. And a lot of the stuff that I did with Power and Politics had nothing to do with those investigations that I just described for you. Those investigations were what I taught and what I did in addition to my duties as a chase producer with Power and Politics. And so now I'm on my own. I teach. So I teach courses I'm teaching two courses right now at Carleton University. And I also teach at the University of King's College in Halifax in their master's program. At Carleton, I teach undergraduate students like yourself, and I also teach master's students. I teach a course in data journalism and investigative journalism. So part of our, the techniques that we will learn is not only an appreciation of politics, but I'll teach you how to become a bit of a sleuth when it comes to finding information that you feel is necessary. So when this opportunity came up because of the pandemic, because I'm in Ottawa, the head of the course reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in teaching because we knew that all of this teaching would be remotely. And I said yes. And I said I'd love to teach this course because, again, I am a political junkie. I have lived, I have breathed it. And I'm going to find this out from you, but I think that this is probably the best time, I would say within the last 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years to be a student of politics. There's so much going on right now and so much ground for us to cover that I leapt at the opportunity to be able to teach something like this. So when it comes to Ryerson, I'm a bit of a novice. So that's one of the reasons that most of you couldn't see my syllabus this morning. I still have no idea if you can see it. You'll let me know. But this is going to be a lot of fun. You'll learn a lot. And hopefully you will take your political IQ from here to here. And this course will be a really good springboard for you to learn more about politics, to appreciate politics, and to become more of a knowledgeable consumer of politics, both as a citizen and more importantly as a journalist. So that's my spiel for now. What I'm going to do is get each of you to, because I don't even know if you guys know each other, but I'm going to get you just take about a minute or so, just to tell me who you are and why you're taking this course and what you hope to get out of it. Who wants to start? Be sure to unmute your mics, please.
I can start.
Yeah,
Oh.
Go ahead, Anastasia.
Sorry. My name is Anastasia. I'm going into my 3rd year in journalism, And with everything going on in the world right now, I'm so interested in politics, and especially how journalists kind of cover them and how like that relationship kind of interchanges. So I'm very excited for this class.
Good. Okay.
I'm Camilla. Yeah, I've always been interested in political journalism specifically, so I'm just really interested in learning all the best ways that we can all interact on every level of the political sphere, especially learning like the best ways to interact on the municipal and federal levels.
Okay. Great. Next.
I can go, I guess. I'm Cassandra. I'm going into my third year of journalism as well. Politics is actually my minor. I'm one credit away from finishing it, so I'm very excited about that. And political journalism is what I'm most interested in, especially international politics and understanding the relations between the US and Canada.
Good. Well, we'll be digging into that one, and we'll be right in the middle of an election. I mean,
I'm very excited.
You couldn't have asked for better. Who wants to go next?
My name is Mira. I'm in my 3rd/4th year, just depending on how things go with fast tracking courses.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I wanted to take this course was obviously now is a very important time to keep informed and to kind of learn all the layers of what's happening in order to better understand it and inform your opinion as a person, but also as a journalist as well, if we're going to be covering these topics, or just covering different types of topics that relate to our world, and politics is embedded in our everyday lives, whether we see it or not. And so keeping informed about that will help me as a person, but also as a journalist as well. So.
Good. Next.
I'm Tess. I'm going to my 3rd year as a journalism student. I have a pretty similar reason as Cassandra, actually. My minor is global politics and development. I finished it this summer, thank God. And I'm from Ohio, also have a huge interest in the US-Canada relations, and definitely international as abroad as well. I don't know what I want to write about yet, but leaning towards politics.
You're from Ohio. The Cleveland Browns is my favorite team.
The first thing people love to tell me is about Cleveland.
Okay. I'm sorry to be so predictable. Sorry, I'll try not to be next time.
That's okay.
Who's next?
My name's Ariana. Like a lot of people have mentioned, my minor is also politics. So I am interested in learning about how to report on politics, opposed to just kind of like learning about it as well, but kind of just both at the same time. And like everybody's mentioned, especially with the current political climate, I feel like this is going to be a very interesting class and give me a lot of useful information that I will use, hopefully, in my career.
Good.
My name is Gabriella. I, like a lot of people here, I'm doing a politics minor. I've always been super interested in covering politics. It's kind of what I want to do after school, like after graduating Ryerson. And I'm very excited to just learn again about US-Canadian relations, especially with the election coming up and how that's all going to play out.
Mm-hmm. Good. Next. Just jump in there, guys. Just jump in there quickly.
My name is Sophia. I'm a 3rd year journalism student. I also just finished a politics minor, but I'm more interested in local government and local politics and how these big things impact us in our day-to-day lives. So I hope we'll talk about that too.
Oh, we certainly will. We certainly will.
Hi there. My name is Shakir. I'm a 4th year/5th year old head student.
4th year/5th year. How does that work?
I have a lighter course load because I'm also working full-time in the summers. So, yeah, I'm here because I dislike politics. I don't like the political sphere. So I'm here just to learn as much as I can so I can tolerate it to a functional level.
Just to be a stick in the eye, right?
Yeah. I work in federal government, so I'm not exactly a fan of the politics of my workplace. So
yeah, well, okay, fair enough. We'll dig into that. Who else wants to jump in?
Hi, I'm Victoria. I'm a 4th year journalism student. I am not in any politics minor or anything. I really haven't had much experience like or done any classes within politics. So I want to just broaden my sense of learning and just learn about reporting in politics.
Good.
My name is Kate. I'm a third-year journalism student with a minor in politics, and I'm interested in the journalist's role of monitoring on governments when passing legislation without going through the proper channels.
Okay.
My name is Kieran. I'm a fourth-year journalism student. I'm really interested in like global affairs and such when it comes to reporting and what have you. So this was a course that I really knew I wanted to take.
Good.
Just to be more familiar with that kind of stuff.
Good.
My name is Lee Ben Ockman. I'm a fourth year.
I can go.
Oh. But,
keep going.
So yeah, I'm a fourth year journalism student. I'm like super interested. I'm a sports guy at heart. So just seeing like how sports and politics play a factor just in terms of that. And obviously like we can't just stick to sports, right? So
yeah. Okay. Go Raptors.
I'm a beer. I just completed my politics minor last year. I've always been interested in politics because I don't believe that the political climate we're in now is just a now thing. It's always been a thing. I'm really interested in learning how to cover it properly, especially as a person of color.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm in my third year of journalism. I guess I'm taking this course because I really like U.S. politics, but I also want to learn like the Canadian relation to that. And like some other people said, I also want to work in like politics, and I'm interested in foreign affairs. So yeah, that's why I'm taking the course.
Okay. Who's next?
My name is Rosie. I'm in my fourth year of journalism, and I'm also doing a minor in politics, like lots of other people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just something I'm interested in.
Good. Good.
Hi, my name is Vanessa. I'm also going into my third year of journalism school, and I'm taking this course because I'm really interested in, like many other people, U.S. politics, and I want to just kind of delve more into the relationship between, or what is supposed to be the relationship between journalists and politicians.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that everyone?
Oh, no, I think, okay. Hi, I'm Emma. I'm a fourth year journalism student, and I'm taking this course because I'm interested in freedom of information requests, and I don't like the Canadian system. I want to figure out if it's a different American system. From my understanding, it's a little bit easier in the States, but my experience with the Canadian freedom of information requests has been awful, and I want to figure out how to make it work for me as a journalist, if it's possible to make it work for me as a journalist. I've been really frustrated with that aspect and like getting access to documents from government organizations. So that's.
All of those stories that I talked to you about that we did were thanks to access to information, federal access to information, and provincial freedom of information requests. So that's a big thing of mine, and we will certainly touch on it. That has everything to do with a concept called open government, and so we'll definitely touch on that. Yeah. Have I left anyone out? Has everyone spoken up? Okay, so the way this is going to work is I want this to be a discussion. I don't want it to be me yakking endlessly and you listening. I want to engage. So if I challenge each other, we will have a respectful conversation, yeah, it'll be a lot of give and take. So the way I'm going to really set up the course is we will start by examining news stories. And literally, like, you have to really pay attention to the syllabus because literally it will change seconds before our course. And I say that because there could be something that's breaking right now. Like right now, as we speak, Premier Doug Ford is having his daily media avail, right? So what we might do is, you know, as a class, we might dip into that to see, okay, well, you know, what does he has to say? What kind of questions is he answering, especially now that a lot of the stuff is going to be about back to school, and then what's our assessment of that? Or, for example, when Parliament reconvenes, question period starts at 2 o'clock, about 2:15, which is perfect for us, right? So we will dig into that. We'll take a bit in, you know, of the theater and whatnot, and then we'll pull out and we'll talk about it. And the same thing with Queen's Park, when that legislature is in session, you know, we'll, to the degree that we can, we'll dip in, and then we'll talk. So I want to make it as interactive as possible, but I don't think that you're going to get as much out of it if you're just listening to me drone on for hours and hours, which you don't want to do. You didn't pay all that money to listen to me drone on. Okay. I think you paid to, you know, to be part of a conversation, to be part of a community. And that's what I hope to build. I know that we're virtual, but there's a lot of stuff that we can do. And I've got a bit of experience doing this in the summer, and I can tell you that it works. It really does work. But it works if we all kind of put effort into it. So have you, before we start with the course, have you had a chance to look at the syllabus at all? So can you actually see it on the D2L site?
I wasn't able to see it on D2L yet. I just saw it through the email that you had sent a few days ago.
So,
but I hadn't seen it on D2L myself.
So you guys can't see it on D2L?
No, I'm also having trouble seeing it too.
Really? Okay. So hang on here. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen, and so this is, so you're not seeing this. You're not seeing, so as a student, you should be seeing this. You're not seeing this at all.
Oh, sorry, I was seeing that, just not the course outline.
Okay, so the way, and you have to pay attention. You have to. I have a lot of news breaks here, and this is something that you guys should get into the habit. If you don't, a lot of the news services have it. Global, the CBC, you know, sign up for their alerts. It's a really good habit to get into. So, and now I'm hardly the expert on this because I'm just getting used to it. But I think that, is everyone here? First of all, is everyone on this page? So just follow along with me. So I think so is everyone here? Everyone can see this?
Yes.
Okay, so if you go to content, and then you'll see the weeks here, right? So click on week 1. Can you see that? Can you see all the links?
Yes.
Okay, so these links, there will be way more than we can ever go through. My philosophy, to use a sports analogy, because I'm a big sports guy as well, is I flood the zone, right? You flood the zone, and I allow you to pick your spots. As the quarterback or whoever, the sharpshooter, you can pick your spots. But I flood the zone with information, because this then syllabus becomes a source for you, not only for this week, next week, but weeks to come, especially if you are students of politics. So what I will have is the basic structure of the course is in the syllabus that I sent you, but every week I basically laid it out, right? So I'll have like links that will basically, the links for me are a template of the material we're going to cover, right? And then the actual reference material is just stuff that you should be just referring to for future assignments or discussions or whatever the case may be. So the reference material, for example, a parliamentary primer, the Constitution Act, the Legislative Assembly of Ontario, Toronto at a glance, right? So those 3 sites basically cover the ins and outs of the 3 levels of government that we're going to be looking at, right? And then going forward in future weeks, if we look at week 15, for example, I will start to have required and recommended readings. right? So the required readings that you should be doing after this class to get ready for next class basically give you a sense of the material that we will be covering, right? And this is the background information that you will need. So we're not going to have a textbook per se, but this is really good reading material that I was able to put together with you with the help of the Parliamentary Library, because I'm still a member of the Federal Press Gallery. Because among other things, I am the deputy managing editor for a publication called National Observer. And I also do, I teach, obviously, which is what I'm doing now. And I also consult when it comes to data journalism and access to information. So I'm able to tap into the library's expertise for them to give me really good reference material, which then I'm sharing with you on this syllabus. So if you go through all of the weeks, you'll see, there'll be required readings and so on. But what you will see as we progress is you will see added to each one of these links as we get closer are links, story links. So this is why this is very live. It's, and like I said, it changes right up until we start talking at 2 o'clock. So you always want to be checking it, okay, for that very reason. So we're in week 1, and so does anyone have any questions about anything that I've said so far? You can stop me at any point, by the way, if you do have questions, but does anyone have any questions? Okay. I am going to, my style is to ask lots of questions, ask you questions. And I have this really annoying habit that if there's too much silence, I'll just sit here and stare at the screen, which gets really boring, right? So please jump in. Okay, we have to be part of a discussion. So when we talk about, so what we're going to discuss is we're going to discuss spend the first half of the class talking about the difference between between the 3 levels of government. So when we talk about the 3 levels of government, what are we talking about? 3 levels of government, what are they?
Municipal, provincial, and federal. Okay.
And generally speaking, what would be the difference between those levels of government?
Well, it kind of depends where you live. Like municipal takes care of the city, and provincial the province, and federal the country. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if we take a look at this link, for example, federal departments and agencies. So if we click on this link, these are all of the departments and agencies that really outline all of the areas of responsibility that fall under the purview of the federal government. And you can see that it is enormous, okay? Some of it is obvious, like agriculture and agri-food is very important. So who would be responsible for ensuring food safety? Any idea?
I think it kind of depends on what type of food safety it is. So something like restaurant establishments would be on the municipal level, I think.
Yeah.
And then more kind of like what Canada's like exporting as food or something that would obviously fall under more federal.
Okay. Okay. So the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, that's why this is a really good list, and that's why it's a link. It's a really handy. Canadian Food Inspection Agency is responsible for ensuring food safety. So anytime there's a food recall, for example, the CFIA issues an alert. You know, if there are concerns about Beyond Meat burgers, for example, you know, that they are not what they say they are, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency would send out a notice about that. Okay. When it comes to farming, for example, that really is Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is responsible for the Canadian agri-food sector, crops, farming, you name it, okay? And then when it comes to exporting our goods, that probably would fall under the Department of Global Affairs Canada, right? Which is responsible for trade. So you can see that government is very, very complicated because it depends on what activity you're talking about. Okay, so during the, I mean, we'll dig into this a little bit more after the break. But so now that we're in the middle of a pandemic, you really want to start thinking about the responsibilities that fall under the purview of the federal, provincial, and municipal governments, okay? So this is a really good source for, oh, the Canada Border Services Agency. What would that be responsible for? Huge. What's
like letting people in and out of the country?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what is a border agent? What do they do?
They kind of screen you for security. They ask you why, like you're coming in, why you're leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Like basically for security reasons, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jonathan, you had a question?
I was gonna say that.
Whoops. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, you were gonna say?
I was gonna say that border security would be in charge of managing people coming into the country, making sure that only the designated people who are allowed to come in can be granted access.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I want you to just spend about a minute or two just navigating this list. And I want to hear some of your thoughts about why you think that the agency or the department in question is important. Just take a few minutes. Who can tell me what the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Commission is responsible for?
I believe it's making sure that what we're broadcasting is proportionately Canadian work. So like if we're doing like music on the radio, making sure that's proportionally Canadian so that we're getting traction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
and when it comes, yeah, go ahead.
So the CRTC was also the ones responsible for allocating the different broadband services available for the 4G and 5G networks. So they make sure which carrier gets whichever signal that they're developing.
Right. Huge issue, right? Wireless, right? The democratization of wireless service, right? There are lots of places in the country that do not have any service. And now that we're in the middle of a pandemic, that really could be the difference between life and death. How much you pay for your wireless, how wireless services are going to be configured. These are all things that the commission is going to have more and more and more to say about. You know, traditionally it's been an undercovered commission. You know, for example, at the CBC is a huge beast, and I think only until recently did we have reporters who covered the commission as a specialty. If you take a look at the Globe and Mail, if you take a look at the Toronto Star, I'd be hard pressed to think about them having someone who covers the commission, not necessarily full time, but keeps an eye on them. So for my money, like if you guys really want to make your mark in journalism, you would you would pay very close attention to the commission, to the politics involved, because there's a lot of really good stuff there. So has anyone come across another interesting commission or agency that would be really interesting to keep track of?
The Canadian Museum of Human Rights.
Yeah.
There was a major scandal there recently where there was, I believe it was sexual harassment and just workplace harassment in general, toxic work environment.
Absolutely. Which is a little ironic for obvious reasons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I thought the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency is kind of interesting, and seeing how that would play between like provincial governments and other areas of responsibility, like how much agency they'd have over certain like economic policies and stuff compared to the provincial or territorial.
Okay.
governments.
Yeah.
I think right now Health Canada would be like a huge one to keep track of, just with COVID and everything going on. There's just something new every day coming.
Wow. Oh yeah. Huge. Huge. And what is, and again, we'll get into this a little bit more after the break, but generally speaking, when it comes to the pandemic, generally speaking, if you let's forget about the pandemic, which I know is hard to do, it's impossible to do, but generally speaking, what is Health Canada responsible for?
They're responsible a lot for the approval of new drugs and treatments. So every time there's a new, like when you see the commercials where it's like clinical study for this, it has to be approved by Health Canada.
Okay. So who would have to approve the vaccine when there is one?
Health Canada.
Health Canada, right? Huge agency whose importance cannot be overstated. They are also responsible for the very medical devices that we were investigating a couple of years ago. So how does that work? Do you guys know, like when a drug is approved or whatever, like how does, any idea how Health Canada might be involved in that? Generally speaking.
Well, it depends on which time scale of the clinical trials it's on. So Health Canada sets a regulatory framework to these drug companies, asks them to pass certain benchmarks, whether it's a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I don't know the exact terminology.
That is the terminology, yeah.
There would be an oversight, either committee or person in charge of whatever new substance is coming out, and the company only gets permission to proceed on to the next stage of development when Health Canada okays the current phase.
Right. And so generally speaking, you're absolutely right. And generally speaking, Health Canada needs proof that the company or a medical expert or whoever comes to Health Canada with a claim. They have to submit proof to support that claim, and then that claim has to be tested. And then the validity of those tests have to be assessed. And after all of that, then Health Canada gives it the green light. But not necessarily because it's a real, it's a real improvement over what's already on the market. Basically, all you have to prove is that it's, and I'm being a little crude here, but your drug or your medical device or your vaccine isn't going to kill anyone. In other words, it's slightly better than a placebo, which is a sugar pill, right? It's slightly better than not taking anything at all. And as long as you can prove that it's safe, then that it's allowed to hit the market. Now, of course, there are all kinds of complexities. Based on what I've just said, there are all kinds of complexities in that statement. What's safe? Is the bar high enough? Are companies forthcoming, as they should be, with evidence about a COVID vaccine, for example? Do the regulatory authorities have the wherewithal, have the muscle to evaluate these products and these services adequately and accurately? Those are all the kinds of questions that we need to be asking as journalists. And sometimes we ask them, but most of the time, as sad as it may seem, we do not. And we'll get into this a bit more when we talk about party politics. more often than not, party politics has very little to do with governing. Party politics has to do with trying to get your man or woman into power. Okay, so all that to say is that Health Canada is probably one of the most important federal agencies in general, but now especially that we are in the middle of a pandemic. Okay, Health Canada. Okay, one more.
Ooh, I have one. Open Government Canada.
Which one?
Open Government Canada.
Ah, Open Government Canada. What the heck is that? Where did you find that?
That's one of the agencies. It's usually within Public Services and Procurement Canada. It's like a sub-agency, I believe.
Is it on this list?
No, not that I'm aware.
You're getting ahead of us. Okay, so Open Government Canada, just generally speaking, and this has to do with, and I can't remember who asked me about access to information, but open government is a concept that stipulates that data and information should be open by default. So that means that you as a citizen, as a journalism student, as a journalist, whoever, should be able to ask for something and get it. Now, of course, that's not going to happen, right? I mean, we live in a real world. You guys have been at Ryerson long enough to know that we don't ask the things, we don't get the things that we ask for. Sometimes we've got to, sometimes we've got to break down the door, or try to anyway. Sometimes we have to cajole, sometimes we have to beg, sometimes, but most of the time we have to be very patient and be strategic and learn how to mine public records. Someone is doing something very loudly. If you can just mute your mic. Great, thanks. And so you have to, but that is the spirit of open government. And very interesting, one of the first things that Barack Obama did when he became president in 2009, which seems like eons ago now that Donald Trump has been in power for 4 years, is he signed a decree basically declaring open government to be an official American policy. And part of that policy is that information is open by default, and that you as a citizen have every right to ask for that information. That you shouldn't have to file a formal freedom of information request or a formal access to information request to get stuff. It should be posted on websites. And I'll show you some of those websites after the break. It is quite a revelation. Some of it is really useful. Most of it is not. But at least it's a start. So that's what we mean by open government. And open government is not just a federal thing. Open government is a global phenomenon that happens at every single level. So you're talking about the federal government. You're talking about the provincial government. You're talking about the municipal government. One of the best open government sites is Toronto, the city of Toronto's site. It's phenomenal. And I don't know if anyone has been on that open data portal, but it is amazing the stuff that you can download. You can download real-time data that will give you all of the inspections for all of the establishments like tattoo parlors and nail salons and you name it. You can now get inspection reports for nursing homes. You can download data that can allow you to determine where you're most likely to get a parking ticket, for example. It goes on and on. And so that is the real spirit of open data. And that is something that has only really come into its own, 2009 notwithstanding. It really is getting a lot better. A lot of the sites are getting better, but there's still a lot to be desired. So open government is a big thing, and we'll be talking a lot about it over the next few weeks. Okay, I'll take one more.
I was curious about, wait, let me go back to it. The one that says limited. Wait, I just missed it again. Oh yeah, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited.
Ooh, yeah.
Is that a for-profit entity? I'm a little confused here.
Yeah, I must confess that I don't really know much about Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, but they're basically responsible for regulating what its name suggests, which is atomic energy, and the way nuclear energy is made, is transported, is like everything having to do with nuclear energy, how it is disposed, the Atomic Energy of Canada Limited is responsible for that. And again, that is one of the very little covered agencies that a lot of Canadians don't know a whole lot about. So this is why this is a really, really good list, if you haven't seen it already, just to spend a few minutes, even after we're done this class, just to go through and just to dig into some of these things, because the federal government does a lot of things that people don't realize, and a lot of things that we don't hear about for the reasons that we will get into. Okay, so that really is the federal government. Now let's go back to the syllabus, and the second story link is Ontario Ministries. Okay, so if we look at the ministries, are they much different from the federal responsibilities?
They are a little different, but I think if you look at federal, provincial, and municipal responsibilities, you'll find that there's a federal, municipal, and provincial component to pretty much everything.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
you're just talking about nuclear energy disposal. Well, okay, on the municipal level, that's like garbage disposal.
Mm-hmm.
So they have different functions, but they fall under the same umbrellas.
Absolutely. So if we take a look at, well, education is strictly a provincial jurisdiction. Okay. So if we just go down the list, Cabinet of the Premier, that's Doug Ford, obviously, Attorney General. Canada has an Attorney General. Canada has a Ministry of Agriculture, Food, and Agri-Food. Okay. So those responsibilities would overlap a bit. The Attorney General's responsibilities would overlap a bit. The Attorney General in Ontario, for example, would be responsible for provincial jails, for example. Whereas at the federal level, it's the penitentiaries. The Attorney General, for example, would oversee, as it says here, a range of legal services, policing and whatnot, right? If we take a look at children and community and social services, that really is a provincial responsibility. Colleges and universities, the fact that you are studying at Ryerson University, that is a provincial responsibility. Economic development, job creation, so education, huge thing. So what's the difference between colleges and universities and education?
Colleges and universities is for undergraduate and graduate education, and then the Ministry of Education is K through 12.
Okay. Okay. Environment is a really big one, huge one. Okay. And again, there is a lot of overlap between the federal and provincial governments. Okay. So when it comes to the environment, what might the province be responsible for?
They would be responsible for maintenance of provincial parks.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Or a pipeline that was within provincial jurisdiction, if it had to run some sort of hearing into safety hearing into whether or not the pipeline should be built. So that typically would fall under the Ministry of the Environment or a related Ministry of Natural Resources or something like that. So you're right, anything that happens within the provincial boundaries. Finance, that's an obvious one. Health, okay, so this is a big one. And right here, there really isn't overlap, right? Now, we spent a lot of time talking about Health Canada. Provincially, what is the government responsible for provincially when it comes to health?
If I had to take a guess at it, I think it would be more specific areas. So maybe things like elderly care or
Yeah.
young kids as well, like more kind of specific areas of for specific health issues.
Absolutely.
Would OHIP fall under that? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would OHIP fall under Ontario?
Yep. Yes.
Ontario?
Yes.
Like, would the province be responsible for like the actual execution of healthcare, and then like federally it would be more like an oversee, and then like more major things?
Yes and no. The way it works is that the feds hand over the money for healthcare and the provinces spend it. It used to be, there was a time when the split was about 50-50, right? 50% federal money, 50% provincial money. Now it's more lopsided. It's more like 70-30, 80-20, with the provinces spending most of their own money on healthcare. Now, this is a big deal because what is the largest expenditure for the provincial government?
Healthcare.
Healthcare, by a wide margin. What would the second largest expenditure be?
It would be education at the college and university level.
Yeah. So college, university, and K-8. College, university, K-8, and then healthcare. Those two represent probably about 2/3 of the provincial expenditure. So we're talking about a lot of dollars. And in both cases, they get a lot of that money from the federal government in what are called transfer payments. And this is where you get into a bit of the back and forth and the negotiations and the politicking between the levels of government. Because Ontario used to be a big have province with lots of money, and then they became a have-not province, and now they're starting to slip back out of that, more into the have territory. Alberta used to be a have province. Now it argues that oil revenue notwithstanding, it is a have-not province. Quebec is a have-not province. So depending on your status, that really dictates how much money you get from the federal government. So health is a huge thing, and the provincial health authority was under a lot of fire during the pandemic. Why?
Long-term care homes.
Long-term care homes, right? Long-term care homes. And if you can go on to, and I can show you the links. I'll post the links on the syllabus. But all you have to do is just download some of those inspection reports and read them from as recently as January. And it's just a horror story. It really is. And you really have to wonder why it took a pandemic for governments writ large, not only Ontario, but other provinces and at the federal level as well, to realize that the care that our seniors are receiving is substandard. Imagine having to call in the army to take care of your grandparents and seniors. Can you just think about that for a second? Calling in the army. We are a first world country. We are a developed country. Amazing resources. One of the top countries in the G7. One of the richest countries in the world. And we have to call in the army to take care of our frail elderly in nursing homes. That is an abomination. Shouldn't be allowed to happen. Okay? And if that doesn't kickstart a lot of questions about the adequacy of our healthcare system, especially when you guys are in journalism school and in a position to dig into this question a bit, then nothing will. It's unbelievable. And even at that, a lot of the stuff that the Army was talking about in terms of what's happening in Ontario, in terms of what's happening in Quebec, was buried in those inspection reports that are online now because of something called open government. Okay, so health is a really big area that we'll have to keep an eye on for some time to come. And long-term care is its own ministry as well. So health and long-term care. Health would be kind of setting the policy, okay? A long-term care would be actually running the day-to-day operations of nursing homes. Any other portfolios or areas of responsibility that strike you as interesting on this list?
I think the Ministry of the Solicitor General is kind of interesting because a lot of what it says is under that authority. I would have assumed is under the General Attorney General.
Mm-hmm. They really work together as well. So the Attorney General would be responsible for laws in a general sense, where the Solicitor General would be more responsible for the police, for jails, for things like that. And you see the same kind of demarcation at the federal level as well, where the Justice Minister is responsible for the laws and the Public Safety Minister is responsible for the RCMP, for the Canada Border Services Agency, for those frontline services, for penitentiaries, for example, right? So you see the same kind of duality happening at the provincial level. What about Indigenous affairs?
Yeah, I find that really interesting that if it's such a major kind of portfolio or issue for the federal government, and that there's such a large area that is left to provinces to kind of decide how they want to deal with that. If that's something that, Trudeau has said a lot of time that that's like a major issue for him, but there's a lot that is left to the provinces when it comes to.
So how might the province be involved? Because you're right. I mean, federally, the federal government is responsible for Indigenous peoples, right? First Nations who are on reserves, for example, the government is responsible for that, for their health, for their education, for their well-being. But what percentage of First Nations peoples live on reserves? Any idea? Just ballpark.
I'd guess no more than 30.
Yeah, if that. Okay. So once they move to the cities, then whose responsibility are they?
No one's.
The other levels of government in terms of services, right? So that's one of the reasons. But Indigenous affairs would also be responsible for, services to some reserves that might be near their borders, for example, right? And some of that might be cost sharing as well. So that's an area that tends not to get a lot of airtime. Usually when you talk about Indigenous affairs, it tends to be at the federal level. And that's where a lot of the focus is. But there's a lot that happens at the provincial level as well.
I feel like transportation too is really interesting because both my parents, they work in it, and I don't think people realize how affected we are by the Ministry of Transportation. It's just like, it's how we get around, and they control all the highways and even like bike lanes. So I think that one's really interesting.
Absolutely. And especially now, like, I don't know like how many of you are actually in Toronto, but there's a lot of construction going on there right now. And when we talk about transportation, for a lot of these projects, we're talking big money. And a lot of that money, where does a lot of that money comes from? Who pays for that? Any idea? Like when you see a new subway line going in Toronto, which is happening right now, who pays for that?
City taxes.
Pardon me? Yeah, your taxes pay for it, but what level of government? Any idea?
Provincial government?
Some of it, yeah.
I thought it was more municipal, like more city taxes.
Not really. No, whenever you see like something like a major infrastructure development, that is usually cost shared. So you're right. So it's cost shared between the feds, the province, and the municipality. And usually it works out to about a third each. They split up the pie. what municipalities have argued is that we have a very limited tax base. Unlike the provincial and federal governments, we cannot tax. So we have very little, we have very few opportunities or ways to raise money. And so it's not fair of us to pay as large a share of the infrastructure spending that we are paying right now because we can't afford it. So therefore, federal government, you should kick in a bit more. So instead of say, you know, you should maybe take say 10 or 15% of our share, and we only pay 10 or 15%. And Toronto Mayor John Tory has made that argument ad nauseum. He's been on our show, Power and Politics, making that argument. He makes it behind closed doors. He makes it in front of microphones. He makes it to other politicians. Anytime he can, he will make that argument. And he has brethren right across the country who are all singing from the same tune. They just feel that municipalities cannot shoulder as much of the burden as they can. But it's huge money. We're talking billions and billions and billions of dollars, right? So you're absolutely right. Transportation is a really huge area. And I'll take one more.
Sorry, I just had a question about transportation.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the responsibility of transportation to and from reserves was a federal responsibility. I thought that was a provincial responsibility under transportation, just because in northern BC there was a lot of rallying for the provincial government to provide transportation between those reserves in isolated parts of northern BC. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on it gets really tricky, right? So in Ontario, there's something called, in Northern Ontario, there's something called the Ring of Fire, okay? And it is supposed to be infrastructure roads that are built between a number of isolated communities in the far north where you could have mining, for example. But if you have no way to get the products out of those communities on roads, right? Because don't forget that, you know, if the roads are frozen during the winter, then it's fine. But in the spring and the summer, there's only one way to get into those communities, and that's to fly in and out. So in that situation, the province and the federal government would be responsible for funding some of that infrastructure. You know, so it really kind of depends on where the responsibility lays. But generally speaking, the feds are responsible for the well-being of First Nations who are actually on reserves. Anything having to do with the health, well-being, childcare services, you name it, they're responsible for it. Once the First Nations, and this is where a lot of the residential schools and so on come in, once they move to the provinces, right, and they start engaging in a lot of the services that the provinces deliver, be it foster care, for example, then they would become the responsibility of the provinces. So you can see them literally moving from one jurisdiction to the next, right? So that's why it's really, you know, important to understand the different roles of government, because unless we understand how the government is involved, we don't know what questions to start asking as journalists, and we don't know how to cover, and we don't know where the accountability lays. And that's really important. You know, if we want to affect change, we have to be able to demand accountability. Well, you can't demand accountability if we don't know who's responsible for what. So that's a real key. Okay. Is there anything else on this list that that strikes your fancy? Or it's not as exhaustive as the federal list, obviously, but there's a lot of stuff on here that's that's worth looking at. Okay, so are there any, before we move on to the City of Toronto, are there any questions about anything that we've covered so far?
Yes, I have one more, sorry, about Crown corporations. I don't see them listed under any department here. From my understanding, they're like a combination of private and public. What kind of assets?
Yeah, that's because these are just ministries, right? So if we take a look at agencies, for example, right, and there are Crown corporations, So we are just looking at the ministries. So that's why. So a crown corporate, what would be an example of a provincial crown corporation?
Like hydro, like BC Hydro, or
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So usually the crown corporations run utilities, for example. So who would be, so they would be responsible for, or services. So they would be responsible for liquor, for booze, the sale of booze. They would be responsible for lotteries. They would be responsible for what are, glorified gaming houses, more often than not, yes. Or they would be responsible for museums, things like that. But these are basically the 24 ministries that would be responsible for the bulk of the responsibilities for the government. Okay, so that's a very good observation. All right, so let's take a look at the city of Toronto. The city is a different kind of beast. Generally speaking, what is a city responsible for? Be it Toronto or Ottawa, where I am, or Montreal or Vancouver, Halifax, you name it.
Cities are responsible for maintaining parks, garbage pickup, sewage treatment, bylaws.
Mm-hmm. What about health?
They're in charge of public health.
Ah, public health. And what's the difference between, say, public health and what the province or the federal government would be responsible for?
Public health is more involved with things such as vaccination locations, safe injection sites, places like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And what else would the city be responsible for?
Well, in the time of COVID, they'd be responsible for the mask bylaw as well.
Mm-hmm. Mandatory mask, there you go, okay. And they would be also responsible for how do they police those workplaces and those environments? How do they police them? How do they make sure that the that people are wearing masks at tattoo parlors or wherever, or that customers are wearing masks in grocery stores and whatnot? Who would be responsible for for inspecting that? Would it be the feds or the provinces or who?
Bylaw officers from municipal governments.
Absolutely, right. So you said something key there, Jonathan, a bylaw. What's the difference between a bylaw and a law, either at the provincial or federal level?
I believe it's that laws can only be made by provincial and federal governments, whereas bylaws are made by municipal governments, and bylaws often don't have like serious criminal penalties. Like you're not going to go to jail if you break a bylaw. Whereas if you break like a law, then you could face serious jail time.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you guys think of some bylaws that you find kind of annoying or useful? What are some common bylaws?
There are bylaws regarding the heights of fences, for example, in certain municipalities that if you move like a few streets away, they're not going to be a bylaw there anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think smoking in restaurants is actually just a bylaw too.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah,
Like
that's a big one. Not as big as it used to be, but yeah.
Parking.
Parking. Yeah. Any others?
Restaurants with if there's any like health complications.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So and that can be complaint based or it can be regular inspections as well. So essentially the municipality is there to regulate the safety of public spaces at the municipal level, but they also deliver services. And as you folks have rightly pointed out, the services tend to be around the public health area. So this is one of the reasons why you have Toronto's public health officer being involved in regular briefings, right? Because they are the ones who are doing the on the ground, the testing and so on and so forth, right? That's where the rubber hits the road. And that's why, from a coverage point of view, you could almost argue that it's more important, like if you had your druthers and you had your dream publication, it's almost makes more sense to, if you're going to choose, to cover municipal affairs more assiduously than you do provincial or federal. And why would that be?
It's
municipal
like
entity.
Sorry.
Municipal entities are responsible for the execution of laws from the federal level, and that's going to be the one that actually affects people, whether these enforcements are effective, ineffective, or enforced unfairly.
Right, right. And it's as you rightly point out, it's what has the most direct impact on people. I mean, if we pull back and we take a look at the federal government, those were a lot of responsibilities. Okay, tons of responsibilities. Okay, if we just go back and we look at look at all of those departments and agencies. It's ridiculous. Right? It's just huge, right? And the same thing at the provincial level. If we just look at the ministries alone, there are 24 of them, and they are huge. I mean, energy, northern development, and mines. Easily, that could be 3 separate agencies or ministries. Easily, environment, parks, and conservation. Easily, that could be 2 separate. Government and consumer services, heritage, sport, tourism, culture. It covers a wide spectrum. But one could argue that what really hits people the most is what's happening on the ground. Getting around, road maintenance, cycling. There was a horrific cycling accident that made news recently. Did you guys know anything about that? There's a famous entrepreneur who was hit by a transport truck while riding his bike, paralyzed from the waist down. Awful story. So that might lead to conversations about, well, was a particular road safe? You might want to go on to, if you're a journalist, you would go onto an open data website. You would find some of the collision data to find out if that area has had a lot of similar accidents, for example. Okay, and then that then allows you to find out, well, who is the councillor responsible for that area? Maybe there have been petitions, for example, that for more safety measures. So all of a sudden we're getting to a level of accountability that's more accessible for you as a journalist and is more meaningful for the people who are immediately consuming your product. And especially as we move into an era where things are going to be stories are going to be located behind firewalls and that, I think that we as journalists have to be telling more stories that way. So that's why I would say that an argument can be made that while the federal and provincial governments are very important, that municipal government its coverage is absolutely crucial at a time when there are fewer and fewer local news outlets for the very reasons that we're talking about. So how do municipalities raise money?
The main way that municipalities raise money is through property taxes.
Okay.
That was kind of decided, this is a little bit more technical, but when municipalities were created, they're created under provinces. So they're actually not given access to the same rights that federal governments or provincial governments have to tax. So they were only given rights by the provinces to tax on property. And even then, big businesses often get exempt.
Yeah.
Another way is through member fees. So if you're paying to use the gym at a local community center, that money will go to the municipality.
Absolutely. Right. So, and you'll notice that if you take a look at successive budgets, and I've done this with some of my students, and we've looked at the evolution of user fees, you'll notice that in a lot of cases, the user fees are rising at a greater percentage than property taxes. So what's happening, and again, this speaks to the accountability, what's happening is that more and more municipalities are starting to to depend on user fees as a source of revenue because they realize that they can only go so far in terms of raising property taxes. I'll give you a perfect example. Now we in Ottawa, and I don't know if it's the same in Toronto, but I suspect that it is, we now pay for water. We didn't used to pay for water as recently as 10 years ago. Now we do. Now you're paying, $100 or so a month for water. That used to be a free service, right? That is a user fee that has now been baked into the general taxes or general fees that we pay. And so, again, if you're looking for stories and if you're looking for good political stories, these are the things that you should start tracking because generally speaking, the Star's not going to do it, the Globe's not going to do it, the CBC's not going to do it. They're going to be looking at the larger issues that are taking up a lot of oxygen. They're going to be following Justin Trudeau and Doug Ford and John Tory, and they're going to be riffing off what those leaders have to say, rather than digging into some of the things that we're talking about here. So if you're looking for good story ideas, how many of you have ever really read a city budget? Yeah, I mean, the city is actually right now, as we speak, they are in the process of crafting their budget for next year. Perfect time to be doing this kind of reporting. What user fees are they looking at increasing? Are they going to be able to pay as much money to hire enough inspectors to go out to inspect public places to see if people are wearing masks, or if nursing homes have the kind of staffing levels that they should have? Are they going to have the resources to do all of these things? And if they don't, where's that money going to come from? Is it going to come from the feds, or is it going to come from the province? If it comes from the province, is the province then going to kick the can up to the federal government to say, no, you're responsible for it? So these are all the kinds of questions that we as reporters and students of politics should really be asking ourselves, because at the end of the day, there's only one taxpayer, and at the end of the day, someone has to be accountable. And it's all about choices. So is the municipality, is Toronto making the right choices? Is it spending the money in the right areas? Or should it be reallocating the way it's spending? And one of the biggest arguments about the allocation of money is the municipalities are responsible for funding what kind of service?
Police.
Go ahead.
I was going to say police.
Absolutely, right? And so defund the police. Okay, so how do you do that, right? You have a police services board that is an arm's length that is responsible for setting the budget, and the money for the police comes out of the property tax. Okay? At the very time when the police to resident ratio is being strained, right? Because Toronto is a city that's growing a lot. So you have to take a look at, is that ratio where it should be? And if you are going to take money away from the police, how is it going to be reallocated? And then what happens if we need more police? It's a very interesting argument, and I don't know that anyone has the right answer, but it's a necessary argument to have. So pretty hard to cover that if you don't realize right off the bat that actually the level of government responsible for policing is the municipality, right? So take a look at the police budgets over the last few years. How much have their increases been? Okay? Have they been keeping pace with inflation? Read their annual reports. What kind are they increasingly being called to mental health calls? And if they're being called to cases involving mental health situations, what does that mean about the level of services that are available for people in those instances? Okay, there's a bit of a chain reaction, right? So our job is not only to try to foster that, that conversation, but also try to look for accountability. Where does the accountability lay? I don't really have the answer to that. What do you guys think?
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
With the RCMP, that's a federal level, but
yeah.
how does that change when, say, like it's the city's responsibility to contract to the RCMP? Like, how does that change for accountability?
That's a very good question. So the RCMP is responsible for a lot of municipal policing, not in Ontario, because Ontario, being the largest province, you have Toronto, Ottawa, you know, Peterborough, Mississauga. I mean, Brampton. You can go on and on. Oshawa. All of those communities, those cities have their own police forces, and then the OPP is responsible for the rural areas. But in provinces like BC, a lot of folks don't realize that outside of probably Vancouver and Burnaby and a few other municipalities, and Abbotsford, for example, that most of the policing in BC is done by the RCMP. They are the municipal police force. That would be the same in Atlantic Canada as well. So when you had that horrible shooting rampage in Nova Scotia during the pandemic, where this guy killed like some 23 people, worse Canadian massacre, that was the RCMP that was responsible for that policing. So we have to know that, right? So it's a level of accountability. So then if you have citizens who are calling for not an inquiry, but calling for an inquiry, not an investigation, whose responsibility is that? Who's responsible for the RCMP?
Well, if I can say, having lived in Halifax for about a year now, the only comparable force that compares to the RCMP in terms of funding, personnel, training is the Halifax Police. And Halifax Police's jurisdiction is very small compared to the RCMP, even though that residents in the surrounding Halifax area would rather interact with Halifax Police than RCMP because they make frequent commutes into the city and by extension feel like they're part of a greater Halifax area.
Right.
So it's difficult because the RCMP headquarters and the depots and the bases are in communities where it's practically just along a highway. Mm-hmm. And they're not exactly located within the communities. They're frequent commuters into the communities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why the RCMP were involved is because the shooting happened in a community that was within the RCMP's jurisdiction, and he was heading towards Halifax, but that's one of it was really on the RCMP's watch. So you can kind of see how, I mean, we've just spent the last hour talking about the different levels of government, but you can see it is a complex discussion. It really is. There's a lot of overlap, but you really have to stop and think, like as reporters, okay, who's responsible for that? Or what piece of that issue does the federal government have, or the provincial government have, or the municipal government have? And that will affect how we cover that. Who we go to for accountability, who we go to for criticism. Right? So those are, the distinctions that we will continue to discuss. But hopefully that's just giving you like a really good overview of the difference in the levels of responsibility. Now we'll take a break in about 10 minutes, but I just wanted to talk very briefly about the difference between party politics and government policy. So for the most part, we've been talking about policy, right? Government policy with regards to health, with regards to the environment, with regards to Indigenous affairs or Black Lives Matter or the police or whatnot. Politics hasn't really entered into it at all. But of course, politics does enter into a lot of conversations. And generally speaking, can anyone tell me what the difference is between policy and politics? When we talk about politics, and while you're pondering that, I'm just going to click on the next link under the City of Toronto, which is the Justin Trudeau is is holding a virtual fundraiser.
To answer the question, policy, I think involves a lot more like, it's the literally what parties are going to do, what governments are going to do, and that's put forward in policy, and then the politics in it. I know there's a whole lot of kind of things within federal government where you can't say certain things depending on like how that aligns to your party. Then it also comes down to voting is a major issue with politics, and how like the voting system works,
Mm-hmm.
and how you're supposed to behave in order to win a certain number of votes in a given district or
Mm-hmm.
a given area, something like that. So it kind of comes down to more the nitty gritty of the system that we've created, as opposed to the administrating of it.
Is politics a bad thing? I mean, it's usually, okay, let me ask you this. How is, when we look at politics, how are politics usually covered? Is it a contact sport, or how do we usually cover politics?
We usually approach politics as if there's a side. That's like where I see the biggest difference between policy and politics. Like politics encompasses it all, whereas policy is like what the government's actually saying and what's actually happening, which we don't cover quite as hostile. Sometimes we don't cover quite as hostilely. Yeah.
How do you think we cover politics?
Depending on the outlet in question, it could be overly detached and focus on the kind of basically repeating what is said during different speeches. In more partisan outlets, it tends to be an us versus them mentality where sides are taken, there's an agenda being pushed, and the credibility of these, the credibility of their sources can vary very wildly.
You're being very kind. Yes. So politics really starts with raising money. Okay. If you as a political party, if you can't raise money, you can't campaign, you can't run ads, you can't run attack ads, right? So whether you're talking about the federal, provincial, municipal level, or even south of the border with the presidential race going on now, where we're talking about real money. Hundreds of millions of dollars just to get in the game. Okay, so here the Prime Minister is holding on September the 10th, which is I look at my calendar, that is Thursday. He's holding the first ever grassroots virtual fundraiser. Do we write about fundraisers a whole lot?
No.
How do parties usually, how do they motivate people to motivate their base to give money?
I would say these days, maybe social media or contacting the database that they already have, depending on who's voted previously, and if they have that contact information, reaching out to them privately.
Yeah.
I know a lot of parties have like membership fees and things like that. So it's like being part of like the party itself. So you get like, I'm guessing perks to it. So
There's also like the idea of like appealing to people with their policies, and like the more they make their policies a certain way or like what they want it to be, then like more people will be inclined to vote for them or like to donate to them.
Absolutely. So look at the messaging here. Okay, he'll be taking questions across the country about important work ahead of us to keep Canada moving forward. What does that mean? Keep Canada moving forward. Is that a neutral statement?
To imply that liberal leadership has been moving
Absolutely.
the country. And,
Absolutely. That is far from a neutral statement. That is a very political statement, moving forward. Okay? We know that not everyone is in the same position to give right now. That's okay. We appreciate you standing with us in every way. Okay? But moving forward, and then you submit. Okay? Now, what about the timing of this? Comes a couple of weeks before a throne speech. Do you think that's any coincidence?
It's,
Not really, okay? So fundraisers, parties will use fundraisers whenever the opponent is in trouble. They will use it to raise money. So you can bet that during the We Charity, if you just took a look at the conservative fundraisers and subscribe to the list, and you'll see, you'll see when you'll get the fundraising letters, and you'll be able to see exactly where they're coming from. Okay, so whenever a party is involved in a controversy like the Trudeau Liberals were with the We Charity, that is an opportune time for a party to raise money, to convince their base to get involved, raise money, and stay on the ready, just in case the government falls in September. Okay, so very, very, very important. And then, so the Conservatives here, okay, now they're asking for another probe. And Pierre Poilievre, who is the Conservatives' attack dog du jour, is demanding yet another ethics investigation, this time into the Prime Minister's senior advisor. Her husband, they are implying that Rob Silver was somehow involved, was in a conflict of interest having to do with a contract that his consultancy received. And Katie Telford had argued that she had already cleared herself of all of the ethical questions well beforehand. So if that's the case, why would the Conservatives still be calling for an ethics investigation at a time when Canadians are concerned about going back to school during a pandemic and there's a throne speech? What are the politics involved here? What are the politics of this situation? I'm not suggesting that the ethics watchdog should not be looking at this. I'm not suggesting that at all. But what are the politics at play here that's important for us to understand as journalists?
Well, the Conservatives and the Liberals are kind of like head to head, and they're very different parties. So obviously they're going to want to try to make the other look bad. And this doesn't just goes for the Conservatives. The Liberals also do it, where like you want your party to be the one that looks the best in the public favor. So you want to do anything to like get the other party to not look the best.
Absolutely. And I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about here. Okay, so if I go back to the syllabus, and we'll get to the NDP in a second, because they are very important in all of this, very key to the government surviving. But let's just take a look at the CBC poll tracker, something that you should keep an eye on. And this basically tells you all you need to do. Look at the Conservatives' popularity going up. Look at the Liberals going down. So again, in light of that, why are the Conservatives hammering away at the government's ethics? What are the politics at play?
It's to keep pushing that narrative that there's an ethics problem within the federal government, and that only the Conservative government is going to be able to fix that.
Absolutely.
Whether or not ethics is an actual issue that the country needs to deal with.
Absolutely. They see it as a vote getter, right? They are going to hammer away at this, and their chief attack dog, their finance critic, very credible, right? Finance critic, he's the money guy, is going to hammer away at this. As the NDP have as well, right? And they've gained, and the Liberals have gone down. Okay, and so that's what's at play. That's the politics. And you'll notice that one of the reasons that there's a lot of disengagement on the part of of citizens is because there is a huge disconnect between the politics and the policies. Right? At the policy level, and we haven't even talked about the environment yet. Haven't even talked about climate change, which is another huge piece, right? But so are people more concerned about the ethical conduct of the government, which is being investigated, Or are they more concerned about if it's safe to go to the store, or safe to send their kids to school, or safe to go to university, or safe to go to a residence in the midst of a pandemic, or if we're doing enough to fight climate change, which by the time that you guys are well into the workforce 20, 30 years from now is going to be a lot more serious than it is now. Are people more concerned about that, or are they concerned about the ethical conduct? I'm not minimizing the ethics, but I would say let the watchdogs look into that. Let them investigate, and then it's up to Canadians to then deliver their verdict during an election. But you can see the difference between the politics and the policy. So I'll ask you this: what gets more coverage, the policies or the politics?
I think the politics.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And in terms of the media outlets, and in terms of the type of coverage, what media outlets, can you talk a little bit about how the different media outlets cover the politics of this differently? How would the Star cover it, for example, compared to the Globe and Mail, compared to the Toronto Sun?
I was just going to state, based on the polls as well, I think something to consider is the fact that a lot of the news these days is based on the idea that the Conservative leader has been replaced by a new leader. And so the fact that that has been reported so much and is what's popular, it makes the Conservative numbers go up and the Liberal numbers go down. And so that's something to also take into account, that there's new news within the Conservative Party, whereas the Liberal Party is stagnant.
There's the new guy, there's the old guy, right? Aaron O'Toole. And he's just appointed his so-called shadow cabinet. What is a shadow cabinet?
A shadow cabinet is the opposition critics for the cabinet.
Okay. And is that important for us journalists to know who the opposition critics are?
Yes, because it could indicate who gets that position when a party forms power.
It could, absolutely, down the road. But even more importantly, or more immediately than that, why is it important for journalists to know who the opposition critics are, not only for the Conservatives, but for the NDP as well?
I think it's important for us to know the opposition based on the idea that there could be implicit bias, there could be, it's important to know who you're dealing with, basically. So if you want to have a good relation with that person and see how they're interacting with the other parties, you need to know their background in order to fairly report on them with an unbiased opinion, even if they are biased.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. And it's important for us to know from a policy point of view where the parties are coming from. So from a policy point of view, the Liberals would be wanting to spend more money. From a policy point of view, the Conservatives are for smaller government, lower taxes, which is a real challenge during a pandemic where people are expecting their governments to spend money. It is very problematic to argue that government should shrink, that government should be smaller, which is one of the challenges for Doug Ford, who is of the smaller is better persuasion, right? Now, all of a sudden, he's having to spend a lot more than he ever dreamed he would, and he's having to change his tune a bit. And it'll be interesting to see over the next few months how conservative parties pivot back to that essential message, or to what degree they will spend, or to what degree they will say we have to get back to balance. Okay? But I was thinking in terms of something really, really practical when it comes to the opposition critics. For a journalist, why is it important you're on a story, you're on a deadline? Why is it important for you to know who the opposition critic is for the story that you're covering?
Because they're going to have the information that you need about whatever they're critiquing. Reaction.
As you know, I manage a bunch of reporters at National Post, National Observer. And I'm always having to remind them, get the views of the opposition critics, right? Because you're right. Quite often they really know their files. They've got smart young people working in their offices who do really good research, who dig up a lot of really good stuff. And if you take the time to talk to them and to look at the research that they've done, they dig up a lot of really good stuff. You know, for example, Jenny Kwan, who is an NDP MP for Vancouver East, was able to do had some analysis done for her where she analyzed the federal government's housing budget and was able to determine, and we ran the story actually this morning, and she was able to determine that so far BC has only received about 0.5% of the money that's been allocated for housing. She was able to do that on her own, okay? So there's a lot of really good constituency, a lot of really good shoe leather reporting, if you will, that is being done by opposition critics that we can tap into for stories, or at the very least, we can be getting reaction. So we can use them to drive stories, and we can also use them if we need a voice to react to what we're doing. And as students, I would suggest that sometimes it's easier for you to get the reaction of a critic than it is of the minister or the parliamentary secretary involved. So just from a practical point of view, it's always really a really good policy to reach out to the critic, or some parties even have deputy critics, right? Who are available if the main critic is not available. So party politics is alive, it's well, it doesn't go away. And the idea of party politics is to raise money and is to really espouse your point of view when it comes to the way you govern. And before we break, I said that I would not forget the NDP because we cannot do that. How is the NDP going to be very crucial? How is this guy right here, Jagmeet Singh, going to be very, very crucial come the end of September? Probably a reason he's smiling the way he is, although this was taken last year. But he's got reason to smile. And why is that?
He holds the balance of power in the House of Commons.
Indeed, indeed. And do you guys think that they will support the government, or do you think that they will vote against the government?
I think they'll support them, but it'll be close.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone want to challenge that?
I think that the NDP has been rather outspoken against a lot of the things that Trudeau's been doing, especially in relation to CERB. So, I mean, we can hope that they'll get along and, you know, make policy decisions in unison. But if we're being real, I think that the NDP will take a strong stance on certain issues and then let certain ones go. Got to pick your battles kind of thing.
Okay. Okay, so let's make an argument either way. Why might they support the government? What's a strong argument for them supporting the government?
So they might support the government if they feel that their own chances of winning come election time aren't that high. Then they would be more likely to support a liberal government than they would oppose them, because at the end of the day, they just don't want the Conservatives to be in office.
Absolutely. And if you take a look at their fundraising numbers, remember we were looking at the federal Liberals fundraiser, their virtual fundraiser. The NDP's fundraising numbers are abysmal. They have no money. They are in debt. They are not in a position to run a campaign, although I'll argue against myself. The NDP were able to make gains during the last election campaign, and they had no money then either, right? They were able to capture the public imagination, and yes, their seat count did diminish, but I'll tell you, they didn't do as badly as a lot of us pundits in the parliamentary press gallery. We were writing that guy off. We were writing this guy off right here, totally. And we were wrong. Now, you know, they only got, you know, their seat count was only in the mid-20s, but we thought that they wouldn't even get official party status. For official party status, you need about 10, 11, 12 seats. We thought they wouldn't even get that. So they exceeded expectations. So one could argue that, well, during the last election, they showed that You could just run on a platform that captures the public imagination. You could do that, but they have no money. And for the, you know, and to stretch their resources for this, that much for the second time in as many years, that might be a bridge too far. What's another reason that they might want to support the government in terms of the policies that they've been pushing for?
They're not exactly sure as to what the new conservative leader O'Toole's platforms will be. They're work with the devil you know, the devil you don't. You don't know what left field curveball could come your way. And just wait and see until that platform is out there and then make your decision on where to put your allegiances.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what are two key issues that the New Democrats, that this guy's been pushing for? Two key issues. There are many, but what are the two that they really campaigned on?
Universal pharmacare and electoral reform.
Okay, but do you think that those two are going to make it into the throne speech?
Universal pharmacare will probably, based on if Trudeau carries through with his election promise, like he said. But electoral reform, I don't see that happening.
Okay, so they're going to have to put a little water in their wine, right? So what do you think that they're going to have to see as a minimum in that throne speech in order to support the government?
More support for CERB, potentially, more than they have been giving.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's another really huge issue that it has to do with universality. Huge issue for them.
Is it Indigenous water issues or just Indigenous issues in general?
That will be important, no doubt about it, but it might not be a deal breaker. What do you think what should we be watching for as we gear up for the throne speech? What issues do you think, what kind of signals do you see Trudeau starting to make in order to galvanize that NDP support that they need?
Universal head-to-toe healthcare, because Jagmeet Singh said when the campaign was launched that he wanted to pass head-to-toe healthcare, which included mental health care for everyone, vision care for everyone, dental care for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But we're missing one really big one, guys. One really big one. This issue is standing in the way of a full or partial economic recovery, and it has to do with moms.
Childcare.
Yes, childcare. Some sort of universal childcare. If not universal childcare, then that money that allows people to have a choice. And when we talk about childcare, what is the big difference between the NDP and say the Liberals? Because they're more or less on the same page. The NDP want the Liberals to go farther and have a universal childcare. The Liberals don't want to go as far because they realize that the price tag is going to be a hefty one. But what would the difference be between, say, that liberal NDP alliance, for the lack of a better term right now, and the Conservatives? In terms of policy. And politics too. Do the Conservatives believe in universal childcare? Take a wild guess. Wild guess.
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Not a chance. Not a chance. Okay? They would rather, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, this is for you guys to determine through your own reporting, through your own thinking. You have to come to the conclusions yourself. But their feeling is that you leave government out of it, you put a little bit more money into the pockets of parents through tax breaks, and you let them decide. Maybe that's the better way to go. But then you'd have to cost out, okay, well, what is the difference between a tax break and a universal system whereby you would have more childcare spaces available? What's the difference? And then if you're talking about more childcare spaces, then is that going to lead to more like how are you going to pay for it? Are you going to have to borrow more money? Are you going to have to raise taxes eventually? Right? These are all the things that we as journalists, we have to start really thinking about these. So how do we follow this stuff? Well, we'll dig into that a bit after the break. I've kept you a little longer than I thought, but we are in a bit of a roll. So why don't we take a break and we'll come back at, how about 10 after 4? And then we'll just take it home for another 40 minutes or so. How does that sound? Okay, so 10 after 4.
Volunteers. Nobody is actually getting paid to run these events. It's just they're all members of the Liberal Party who do this on, say, a volunteer basis.
Right.
So my MP can run various fundraisers without actually having to spend a dime of his war chest, because that's just taken care of by the existing party infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends just recently transferred out of the city of Toronto. Before that, he was an aide to Jennifer O'Connell.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to door knock as a student, as a 17-year-old. And he wasn't getting paid anything at all. But because he was a member of the party at a youth level and was picked up through the process, legally speaking, he could go and door knock and work, what would be part-time hours,
Mm-hmm.
or in some cases nearly full-time hours, 40 hours a week. He could work without any financial compensation. He waived his right to financial compensation because he was overall part of this liberal structure team, and this was, he's a dues-paying member of the organization, and therefore he is under no obligation to get paid unless payment is offered to him.
And so what does that speak to in general, taking into account what we've spent the last couple of hours talking about? What's your assessment of how that fits into our conversation about politics and policy?
Well, ultimately, I view it as a battle between official hours and sort of unpaid hours. With politics, it's a lot of the times people on their their off working hours are still actively in the workplace, in the workplace idea. They're 24 hours a day consistently focused to this one topic. While most of us have, we're working and then we're having our home lives. And when I see politics, it's the battle that's taking place when the rest of us are at home and doing our normal things.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts they'd like to share? Jump in. We're talking about now people who are volunteering for parties during elections, for example, during door knocking campaigns, which is an essential part of any election. It's the volunteers basically make it work. I mean, that's one of the reasons why leaders stand up and in their victory speeches, either during leadership contests or elections, the first people they thank are their volunteers. And that's why there are a lot of committed people who devote hours and hours and hours of their time. So that too is part of the political process and the grist for conversation. So given what Rimsey just had to say about this, any thoughts about how a closer look at volunteers fits into the broader narrative of political coverage? For example, is this something that, let's say that we were in the middle of an election a month and a half from now, and you're looking for ways to cover the election? I would suggest that taking a look at the volunteers in your catchment area, especially in the midst of a pandemic when we can't really go that far, taking a look at volunteers and how they're being managed and the issues that they have isn't a bad way to get into it. It's something to keep in mind. And that's something that I always had to, when I was on a show like Power and Politics, it's always something that I had to keep reminding myself that volunteers are a key part of the electoral political process. They really are. They are part of the political process. And they receive even less attention than some of the policy discussions that we were talking about have received. So just important food for thought. Thanks for sharing that. Before we move on to talk about a little bit more about levels of responsibility during the pandemic, any thoughts about anything we've covered so far? Any revelations, any reflections, any surprises? Or are you all so smart that you all knew all this stuff already?
There's one thing when we were on the first list of federal departments. I see this Canadian Race Relations Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't recognize this. This is new to me.
It's fairly old. I think it was around during the Harper days, but it's one of those agencies that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, and that's one of the reasons that I like to bring these lists to the attention of my students, because they're excellent story ideas. One of the best ways to get a story that no one else has got, that you can either use for an assignment or freelance, is to basically talk to those agencies that people ignore. A lot of really good stories sitting right there. Another example of an agency or an institution that people ignore regularly, and we'll look at some of their judgments in the next few years, in the next few weeks rather, are human rights commissions. The Federal Human Rights Commission, the Ontario Human Rights Commission. They come up with really important judgments, and for the most part, they just pass totally unnoticed. Again, just because that, unless it's a spectacular case, we just don't seem to notice. But again, one of the things that I will stress in this course is the same thing that I stress for any student I teach, and it was my mantra, is that look for original stories in original places that people are ignoring. Find original stories. They're easier. I think they might not be as easy to tell because there's not as much information about them, but they're easier to sell, right? And they're easier for you to distinguish yourself as offering something different from your competitor. So to the extent possible, find original stories. If that's through an access to information request, great. But if it's not, start with some of those agencies that don't get a lot of attention, like the National Parole Board, for example. Great example. If for the asking, the National Parole Board will give you statistics on all of the pardons that have been issued over the last several years. Everything from drunk driving to assault. And they'll break it down by year. A lot of really, really good stories based in data like that. So again, pay attention to the agencies that don't get a lot of credit. Might be worth your while as you look for assignments and story ideas to sell. Any other reflections on what we've covered so far before we move on?
I think the biggest thing for me today was that.
Go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt. Is that, well, I've always loved local news, and then especially today when we're talking about it and breaking down the different levels, it is so, or often neglected, and a lot of people focus on like federal, but I think that if we focused a little more on what's happening right under our noses, I think we could grab a lot of great stories.
Absolutely, and with an important caveat, using the same critical faculties that we're developing at a school like Ryerson.
Definitely.
To look at it with the same critical eye, demand the same accountability, to look in those sources where a lot of people don't look, to actually read a budget, to look at things like user fees, how are they going up, to take a look at police board minutes, to look at the increases that police have been getting, to look at the issues that police have been complaining about for years. How many years have they been complaining about being called to too many calls where mental health has been an issue? Maybe if you examine the minutes of board meetings where presentation after presentation, if you've looked at annual reports, it could be that they've complained about this for years and no one's paid any attention until now. Right? So these are the kinds of things that we have to start digging into. And now's a great time to do it. It really is.
David, I wanted to build on your point that you mentioned about how sometimes in the weirdest departments you can find stories. So I did my internship for course credit with the politics department at the National Post this summer. And there was one story that we found, one of my supervisors sent it to me. It was from Open Government, which is usually a department people don't go and check out. And he's like, this looks weird. He's like, do you mind checking it out? And it turns out that it ended up being a pretty big story and it was popular on the website and people were sharing it on social media.
What was the story?
So it was about SNC Lavalin. They've received 152 government contracts since the SNC Lavalin scandal back in 2019, which was quite shocking.
Wow. And that's just from, and what kind of data did you get that from?
It was from a database that that the Open Government keeps on who receives government contracts. And my supervisor said, he's like, this looks weird. He's like, do you mind giving it a check out? So I looked into it and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, this is definitely messed up. And then he's like, go write a story, and then turn it in a few days later. And then it was pretty popular on the website.
Good. Well, Jonathan, if you wouldn't mind, if you can email me that, I'll post it on our website so that other people can take a look at it, because we are going to be talking about open government in a few minutes. So that's a good one.
It's scary, some of the things you can find on Open Government.
Absolutely, absolutely. So during the pandemic, what are some of the areas of responsibility that we should really be watching for as we go forward over the next few weeks at the federal, provincial, or municipal level? What are the kinds of responsibilities and services that we should be taking a look at and examining through the critical lens that we've been talking about?
I think we really need to be looking at education right now, just because school is starting up and COVID has impacted everything. So I think just policies and the way things are changing, that's something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And what does it really come down to? What do you think the bottom line is in the education debate? Always comes down to this at the end of the day. It's one word, very powerful word. Some people say it makes the world go round. Who knows?
Taxes and money?
Money, right? Follow the money. What's one of the reasons why it's complicated for reasons that I don't quite understand, but it has to do with funding formulas, right? So the way the formula is set up, schools get a certain, boards get a certain amount of money for like per student, right? So it's a funding model that is a little complicated. But at the end of the day, if you have smaller classes, what does that mean that a government has to do? In this case, the province, which is responsible for education, as we saw earlier on. If classes are smaller, you need more what?
Need more teachers.
You need more teachers. And if you're going to have more teachers, you need more money to hire them. So the government says, well, boards, the answer is very simple. You can just dig into your own reserves to hire more people if you want. Problem solved, right? What's the matter with that argument? Again, we're following the money, right? What's the matter with that argument?
Are those reserves the backing for the pension funds?
The reserve funds? No, these are like the city's reserve funds, right? So how could what would an analogy be? Let's say that you have a bank account And from that bank account, you pay your bills, you pay your tuition, you pay your rent, you pay all your bill, your food and whatnot. And then you might have a little reserve that is not to be touched unless there's an emergency, right? A rainy day fund. And that emergency might be, I don't know, it could be anything, right? Something unforeseen, let's just put it that way. What's the matter with the government saying, well, just dip into your rainy day fund if you want to hire more teachers to bring down the class sizes? What's the matter with that argument?
Then they have no more rainy day fund for an actual.
Absolutely. So what kind of a story could you do with regards to that then? That gets beyond the kids are scared, parents are scared, teachers are scared. And we've read a lot of those stories. We've heard a lot of those stories. We've watched a lot of those stories, and they are real. But how do we, if we're following the money, how do we go beyond that to dig into this, the politics and the policy of this a little bit more?
I would say you could probably do a here's what happens when they actually run out story. Talk about like what's at, like, so come up with a theoretical emergency like that they would need to solve then with that money, and talk about what really happens when they actually have no money and who's going to have to actually make the sacrifices. And
absolutely. I'll go you one step further. It doesn't have to be theoretical at all. All you have to do is read their past budget statements, and they will explain the kinds of things that their contingency fund pays for, right? So it's there in public records. And so you can say, well, if they use up their contingency funds, these are the kinds of things that they can't do. And it's a little like during the pandemic, because the hospitals were having to set aside bed space in the eventuality of being overrun, that meant that a lot of elective surgeries weren't being done, right? So sometimes the stories that we can do is to talk about what can't be done because this is being done. It's almost like counterintuitive, right? But it's another way to get into the story. So that would be, and if you take a look at the teachers, there was a huge issue just about a year ago with regards to teachers. What was that?
The Ontario.
What's that?
The Ontario teacher strike.
Absolutely. And the big issue there, a big issue, was money, right? And so the Ford government isn't all of a sudden going to see the light and start spending oodles of money in an area where we've determined that education is the second largest expenditure for the government, for practically any province. Second largest. It's big, big, big money. And so if you start allowing smaller class sizes, that eats into that deficit. So it's a question of money. Right. And so we have to, so how much more money would it really cost? Right? How much more money would boards have to spend to hire more teachers? How many more teachers would they have? Right? So these are this is the kind of critical lens that we have to develop when we're looking into these issues, because then it forces us to ask different questions, and it forces us to follow a different debate that goes off. I mean, we still have to understand what the debate is writ large. Right? We still have to read assiduously. We still have to pay attention to what's happening. But we're always trying to riff off the mainstream, right? To tell people something that they didn't necessarily know or aware was happening. Okay? So in addition to education, what would be another really big issue that we should be keeping an eye on in terms of government responsibilities and the pandemic?
Lockdown measures.
What do you mean?
So today I got a news notification about a few hours ago saying that the Ontario government will be remaining in stage 3 at this point. I know that some provinces, I believe it is in Quebec, that they're going to be rolling back opening requirements for bars. So that way less infections happen. There's concerns of a second wave forming, just like there's been second waves in the States, in Spain, Italy, and it's all basically, are we going to keep locking down whenever there's an outbreak? Or are we going to adopt approach like Sweden and do herd immunity?
And so okay, if we're thinking about stories, and say you had to pitch something for, say, next week, what might you look into?
I'd look into what is the probability. I'd probably do a story. What is the probability that Ontario locks down again?
Okay. So we're still in stage 3, right?
Yes.
And they've extended that till when?
They've said that we're not going to be moving into stage 4 for at least the next month.
So who's affected?
Everyone, really, because COVID's affected everyone in at least some way.
Right, right. But what does staying in stage 3, what does that allow the government to do? And anyone can jump into this conversation, by the way.
It means bans on concerts, sports games, all you can eat buffets, all that.
Okay. So where do we go with that, folks? Okay, we're a newsroom, right? This is our story meeting.
Concert people are probably pissed.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you start making some calls. Yeah, where else might we go?
Number of documented infection sites in these places like restaurants, bars, and concert venues.
What do you mean?
Well, if we're worried about a second wave, then when we look at how it's been affected in the past months when it's been open, like how many people have been infected, how are they keeping track of staff, how are they checking staff members, are they allowed to, those kind of places, focusing in on those specific places that are affected in the different stages, like restaurants, bars.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think contact sports would be an interesting take on it, because pretty sure prolonged contact still isn't allowed in stage 3. So how professional sports are affected, or even just minor leagues or recreational leagues will be affected a lot by this. So I think that'd be a cool angle.
Absolutely, and those are all terrific ideas, right? So that is really so I think that what you're looking at in terms of the province then is the degree to which the Ontario kind of stays in that mode, and perhaps more importantly, why? Like who's telling Ontario? Is that coming from their chief medical officer? Where is that information coming from? And is there pushback from some of the other health authorities that, for example, outside of the GTA, like Ottawa or in the north of the province, who feel that they are being affected by what's happening in the GTA? Or is this going to be is this an announcement for Ontario writ large, or is it only for the GTA? So those are the questions that you'd want to have, okay? And certainly what you want to keep an eye on, okay? I think the long-term care piece is something that we shouldn't forget. We should continue to look at that. And public transit, okay? Keep an eye on the TTC and what's happening there. Are protocols being respected? What protocols are in place, okay? So these are all the kind of public services and some of the lower income neighborhoods. Have you guys ever done any mapping exercises at all with regards to COVID? So if we take a look at Toronto, for example, I think Toronto's got something like 40 some odd neighborhoods that are mapped. Where are some of the poorest neighborhoods? Any idea where they are?
Most of the poor neighborhoods are in the the far west end of the city, so Rexdale, Etobicoke North, that area.
Yeah.
And the far east end of the city, such as, I believe it's Scarborough Rouge Valley.
Yeah, yeah. And so, okay, from a reporting point of view, then where do you go with this? Okay, again, we're on the hunt for stories, right? So what are we going to do? Like, who would we talk to in these communities?
Community leaders.
Aha, yes, okay. And what might you ask them?
Why do you think there's such a large number of cases in your area? How do you feel about the large number of cases in your area? What is your area doing to address COVID-19, things like that.
Right. And you might ask them if they are being tested enough, because maybe they're not.
You could also ask them what they need, like in their perspective, what are they lacking?
Yes.
Like, what sort of resources do they want?
Absolutely. I'm going to share something with you. And this is I explained to you that I'm a data guy, and this is some training that I did with folks at Humber. And, oh, I'm not sure. I guess I should share my screen, shouldn't I? Hang on. Let me share my screen. All right. Okay. Well. Okay, so you can see that? Okay. All right, so these are all the Toronto neighborhoods mapped out according to, just let me view this in a better map. Here we go, okay? So who was saying that the communities in the, and the darker areas are the poorer areas, right?
Yes.
So who was saying that the communities in the northwest section?
That was me.
Yeah, okay. I'm not quite sure who me is because I can't.
Jonathan.
Okay, Jonathan, yeah. So as you can see, that's what we're talking about here, right? And so, you know, I mean, if it's me, like this, it's hard to read here, but Black Creek, Glenfield, Jane Heights. I don't know if how many of you are from Toronto. Humber Heights, Westmount. Okay, as you can kind of see. So, I mean, what you do is you go to these communities and say, hey, you know, what's happening? You can see the lighter communities are the more well off, right? Like Mount Pleasant East, Lawrence Park South, okay, Niagara. Okay, but you can see where some of these neighborhoods are, and so, you know, probably what we want to do is we want to keep an eye on these neighborhoods, you know, just to make sure that they are not that they're not, you know, that the infection is not running amok. Okay.
I was just a little bit curious with some of the boundaries for those lines. So between somewhere like Clinton, or sorry, Bathurst Manor and like Lansing Westgate, where it's between those two, that's like it's pretty different between the income levels there. But then there's also kind of like this artificial bordering done there, or just kind of the uniqueness of that line between Bathurst Manor and Lansing Westgate.
Well, these are the actual neighborhoods. So all I did was I took the it's called a shape file for the neighborhoods. I downloaded that. And then I just and then I got the COVID numbers that are broken down by neighborhood, and this you can get from the Toronto Toronto Public Health website. And then I just did a join in a mapping program, and you could actually see. And then you can overlay this with income data, and you can and there is definitely a correlation between the high numbers and the lower income. Definite correlation. So I think that as we go forward, one of the policy areas that you want to be looking at, and that's more accessible for you guys, is what's happening at the neighborhood level. Mm-hmm. How can I track that, right? And I think talking to community leaders is a great idea. Because a lot of reporters won't be. They're going to be looking at the big stories, right? And I'm not saying that the reporters shouldn't be looking at those big stories, but at the neighborhood level, that's really key. Okay, and let me see if I can just let me see very quickly here. And this really speaks to the open data. So, okay, let's see here. Okay, status of cases in Toronto. Is this the one? There we go. Status of cases in Toronto. Okay, so you've got the cases, you've got recovered cases, you've got deaths, and you've got cumulative institutional outbreaks. And then here you have, here's your COVID-19 Toronto area neighborhood maps. See, so this is what I was able to map out. So this is what they've done here. This is the same thing. And you can see where all the dark colors here. And if you hover your mouse over, you can see that a lot of cases in like Humber, West Humber, Clairville, okay? So it really tends to be in these areas here. And then you can actually, you can download this in an Excel file. How many of you know how to use Excel? Okay, well, I'll upload some tutorials for you. You guys can walk through it. This isn't a data course per se, but as far as I'm concerned, every journalist should have a minimal knowledge of how to manipulate data so they can do stuff like this. Okay, and it's just, it's not, you guys are really smart. That's why you're here. It's pretty simple, right? So you can download the data. Let me do it quickly. Right, so you can download the data and you can, whoops, and right, and then you'll get like an Excel worksheet like this, and you can see that the different work tabs, right? They have the information. So these are all the cases and rates by neighborhood. And you can see that there are, there's more than 40 something. There's about 140, there's missing a number here, but 140 neighborhoods, right? And so each one of these neighborhoods, I mean, even if you just did this, you wouldn't even have to map it. Even if you just open this up and you sorted the, say, case count or rate, right? If you sorted the rate in descending order, you can see that West Humber, Clairville still has a pretty high rate, not necessarily the highest case count, but a high rate. And Mount Olive, Silver, Thistletown, Beaumont Heights, Rexdale, Kipling, all of these, right? And it's just a question, and then you have sporadic cases, you have recent cases by neighborhood, recent sporadic cases and rates. So just by downloading this Excel file, and all I did was I just opened it. I didn't do anything else. I just opened it. You guys should have Excel on your system, and you can just use this as a really good tip sheet. You don't even have to map anything. Just locate the neighborhood and away you go. So this is probably, if I were you guys, this is what I would be monitoring this regularly, because I would suggest that it's a really good tip sheet for stories and speaking to community leaders. This is, I think, a textbook example of open data in action. And the whole idea of data is that it should be open by default, and that it should be readily accessible in a format that is easy for you to get. Okay, so this is a really good example of an open data portal. So they've got your neighborhood maps, you've got your monitoring, you've got outbreaks, and look at this, ethno-racial group income infection. So they've even broken all of this stuff down for you. Okay, so this is really, 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 really good data, really strong data. Okay, and it's the City of Toronto. City of Toronto COVID-19 latest City Toronto news. Okay, this is really good stuff. Okay, I know I'm going pretty quickly here, but this is I'm also recording this, and I will be posting these links as well. Okay. So with regards to open data, does anyone have any general questions before I plow on? Because we're running out of time. The concept of open data, we'll come back to it. We will come back to it again and again and again, but does anyone have And if we just take a look at our syllabus here, that Toronto data, it's towards the end here. Learn about open government, right? And then I've got this COVID-19 is for federal, provincial, Ontario, and Toronto, right? So the links are here, right? Okay, so let's scroll to the bottom of the links under the reference material section. And if you click on this, learn about open government, and it's taking its time. Oops. And for whatever reason, and I experienced this before, sometimes these links, like they will default to a wayback machine, and you have to click on them again. So if it does that, don't get discouraged. And I'm not quite sure what the deal is there. Okay, so this is the open data portal. Okay, and there are some terms that you should be familiar with. Proactive disclosure means what? What do you think that proactive disclosure means? If I disclose something to you proactively, what does that mean?
Actively making an attempt to broadcast a message instead of having a message passively sit in a certain file or website without letting anyone know.
That's right. So I am taking the initiative. I'm a proponent of open government. I'm proactively giving you this information. So is everyone on this page here? So if you look at under the proactive disclosure, you can see this drop-down menu here. Look at all these really interesting bits of information that you have that are released proactively. Okay, so who was asking me about access to information?
Emma was. I was.
Okay, Emma. So are you here? Because this is really good for you. Are you on this page right now?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, so if you go to, okay, so there's briefing note titles and numbers. So right now, we used to have to ask for briefing note titles for a particular minister, and then we would get those titles within about a month or two. And then from the titles, we could cherry pick the briefing notes we wanted. Now they're releasing those titles proactively. Another really good one is question period notes. Okay, question period notes are, and when we do our virtual visit to Parliament Hill, you'll notice that ministers will stand up and they will be asked a question and they would read from notes. Okay, so if you click on this question period notes here, and again, the connection is a little long. Oh, and then go. I should remember to do that. And we will eventually connect to the notes. And these are notes that the ministers actually read from. And these and hundreds of these are prepared at a time. What's really interesting about, I don't know what's doing that again, but what's really interesting about the question period notes is that for the most part, ministers are never asked about this stuff, right? They're prepared to stand up and expound on something, and they are never asked. So you can actually then do a search here, right? So you can go, I don't know, what do you want to, you can search on your own, but what do we want to search for? Well, poverty among vulnerable groups, okay? So this was on November the 18th. So if we click on this, right, this is the reference number for it. This is the date received. This is the organization, so it's Employment and Social Development. The minister in charge is Ahmed Hussein. He's the Minister of Families, Children, and Social Development. This is the question. This is the suggested response, which for the most part is a news release. I'm not going to kid you. This is the background. And this is additional information. And sometimes they will have, you know, if pressed, then answer this. If pressed, then answer this. This is stuff that we used to have to file access to information requests, excuse me, to obtain. And now we get it, we can get this stuff proactively. So that's what we mean by proactive disclosure. Now, you know, is this damning stuff for the government? Not really. This is stuff they were prepared to talk about. That being said, this is excellent background material for you, really good research, because everything is there, right? They cite news articles, they cite StatsCan, everything is here. So it's a one-stop shop. So, you know, take a few minutes to, you know, to do a search. What else might we search for? Any ideas?
I'm blanking right now. This is bizarre.
COVID-19?
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, that's a big one. Now these, you know, take into account that, you know, these only go up to a certain date, right? So you're not gonna, they're only released about twice a year. So I think they're released at the end of the calendar year and the middle of the year, like June or so. So they're not gonna go past, you're not gonna get August and you're not gonna get September. You're gonna have to wait until December for the next batch. But still, this is not bad, right? So personal protection equipment procurement from China and Canada-China trade relations. Okay, fine. So the question, the government of Canada continues to support procurement of medical supplies from China. Trade with China has been decreasing in 2020 due to COVID-19, but this decline is unrelated to failures in some procured personal protective equipment. And there's your suggested response. We take this matter very seriously, blah, blah, blah. Governments always take something seriously. It'd be news if they didn't, okay? So I don't know why we report on something so obvious that, you know, they're taking something seriously, but that's another tangent, right? And then you just have your background here. So this isn't, I don't think that this is particularly illuminating, but, you know, First Nations policing, for example. Suggested response. I would like to suggest the efforts of frontline policing services all over the country, including those in Indigenous communities, have been dedicated to ensuring public safety during the challenging environment that COVID-19 has created. I'm thinking, okay, what's the deal with First Nations policing? Is there an issue? Right? So this could be a tip sheet. Something really interesting, right? That I never even knew about. So all I'm suggesting is that, remember I said, look to areas where a lot of people don't venture. And this is one of them. And this is how proactive disclosure and open government portals, we've seen two examples of this. There's these question period notes. We've seen the city of Toronto's COVID status of cases in Toronto. This is an excellent one. And there are lots of other links like this that I will introduce you to. I'll walk you through how to use them. But it just allows us to get at some of the policy, to divorce the politics from the policy, get at the policy, which I think is, for the most part, a better way of covering politics. Let's get at the policies that really affect people. We can talk to real people, okay? So we're running out of time, and I do have to discuss the assignment coming up, which is a group discussion. So, oops. It's a group discussion that is due in week 3. Okay, it's a 600-word backgrounder. So someone asked me, which is an excellent question, well, what's the date? Because week 3 could be any time, right? Week 3 could be, I'm looking at my calendar here, week 3 could be the 21st, it could be the 22nd, or it could be the 25th. What do you guys think? I believe in democracy. What date works best for you guys? that week?
What are you asking? Sorry.
The assignment, the first assignment, it's a 600-word backgrounder, right? On the relationship between the federal, provincial, and municipal governments.
20th September on the Friday?
The Friday, the third week begins Monday, September the 21st. That's the third week. So I'm asking, should we make it on the Monday, the Tuesday, the Wednesday, or the Thursday? What do you think?
Would anybody be interested in the Tuesday? Just
What's
the day
that?
of class?
Yeah, the Tuesday before class.
Okay, we'll make it, okay, I'll make that change. Tuesday before class. Okay? In terms of the backgrounder, yeah, I mean, I'm just looking for just 600 words, right? And you just explain to me, you give me, 2 examples of how the 3 levels of government are working together to puzzle through a pandemic-related issue. And I think that this will set you up nicely for the throne speech. It'll put you in the right headspace to then pay attention to the throne speech and then do some work out of that.
What date is the throne speech?
It's the September the 23rd.
Awesome.
So yeah, if we make it for the 22nd, that's the day before the throne speech. Okay. If you ever have any questions, or if you want to run something by me, just email me. Okay. Like if you're not sure or whatever, or if something isn't clear, just email me. I respond to emails very quickly.
I was wondering what the group component of this assignment as well that you'd mentioned.
Okay, hang on here. So let's go back to and I'm going to stop sharing. Let me hang on here. I'm going to stop sharing and let's take you to the outline. I've got so many things open here. Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's close that. Whoops. Okay, hang on here. Okay, while I'm looking for this reference, does anyone have any other questions about what we've covered so far, other than the assignment? Any questions? Okay, hang on here. I must have accidentally closed in my enthusiasm. Okay, so your question was?
Oh, sorry, you just said that it was a group assignment.
Yeah, just
words.
So Have you guys have done group assignments before? Have you not?
Yeah, a few times.
Okay, so there are a couple of ways to do this. And so there are 30, and now I haven't taken attendance yet. This is a large class. I believe there are about 30 people. Am I kind of accurate?
There's 22 here.
Okay. So for this particular assignment, there is no group assignment. It's just one-on-one, just you. Okay. Coming out of the throne speech, we will do the group assignment. So that's when you'll get into groups of, say, maybe 4 or 5 groups, and then you will actually do a group assignment, and it'll be a presentation based on the throne speech. But for this opening round, it's just a 600-word backgrounder, and it's just you doing it by yourself.
How are we going to do the presentations through Zoom?
You will probably, I have to work that out, and that's in about 4 weeks' time. But I'm thinking that you probably will assign a leader who will then just do the presentation. And I will give you more information about the presentation, but I don't want to overload you. Let's worry about the backgrounder first. It's fairly straightforward, but like again, if you have any questions, just let me know.
So the due date is September 22nd.
We will make it September the 22nd.
Okay.
And I'll put that into the right at the top of the syllabus, the new due date. Because I'm told that I'm not supposed to go into the general syllabus that I sent you and change anything. I have to keep that constant. So I will do it on the syllabus that we've been looking at. Okay, any questions before I let you go? What do you think of this first session? Got lots of really good story ideas? Okay, all right. And I will also figure out how you're supposed to, I'm still getting used to D2L, so I'll have to figure out, and you probably know the answer to this more than me, but how you actually then submit the stuff. I'm assuming that it's all submitted through this platform, but I will find that out. Okay, I've got 2 weeks to figure that out. Okay, in the meantime, let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you all next week. Okay?
Well, thanks so much. This is
Thank
awesome,
you.
actually.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.